Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we're continuing on right now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days. The topic of day 3 is one near and dear to my heart, and will soon be to all of yours too, I think, which is ranges. We call this the language of winning play because good players talk in ranges instead of hands. So what is a range? Well, what you do is you take all hands that are consistent with how your opponent's played so far in the hand, and that's his range. So why don't we begin with the rules of ranges. First rule is that we have a hand and our opponent has a range. So the dealer deals out the cards, we know our specific hand like 10-8 suited, we don't know our opponent's hand, and the best that we can do is put him on a range of hands. And those ranges are going to change with every action that he takes. So at the start of the hand, his range is just any 2 cards, and based on what we see him do, we update that information and decide on what his range is, based also on what we know about his player type and other reads. And we're going to assume that our opponent is equally likely to play all hands in his range that way. So expressed another way, for every hand in his range, his actions are equally consistent with each of those hands. What it doesn't mean is that all of the hands themselves are equally likely, because there are more and fewer ways to be dealt some hands. So let me give an example of that actually. And let's give our opponent a very specific range. So way more specific than we would normally have in practice. So his range is going to be pocket jacks and ace king. Well, there are more ways to be dealt ace king or any unpaired hand than pocket jacks or any paired hand. So ace-king is still going to be a more likely holding for him than the pocket jacks. And post-flop, the effect could be more extreme. For example, we might say his calling range, if we shove this flop, is any ace or bottom set. Well, there are only going to be 3 ways to make bottom set. We'll talk more detail about that idea of hand combinatorics in a future section, whereas there are a ton of ways you could have a hand containing an ace. So what basically this means is that his actions are equally consistent with the different hands. So this is a slightly subtle point. Don't worry if you need some time to digest on that. We all do, but this is our third rule of ranges. And I have a bonus range rule, which is that our opponents are going to be ranging us as well. And we similarly have a range for playing the hand the way that we have. And one thing we're going to find a little bit in this course, and is also going to be a topic of further study we give at the end, is that our range is very important for game theory and coming up with what's called unexploitable strategies. So this is an important idea to start keeping in mind a little bit, even though for right now, we're mainly going to consider our opponent's ranges. So how do we do that? What is villain's range? Well, we're going to start with all hands. So again, at first, all we know is that the dealer has sent 2 cards his way. He's on a range of any 2 cards. And then we go down a funnel. So based on new actions that he takes, we start updating what we think his range is going to be. And you always want to start with pre-flop. And some of the time, pre-flop is going to tell us a tremendous amount. Like, let me give an example of that. Let's say that a player raises under the gun, and another player re-raises, and then there's yet another re-raise, and then a tight player jams it in. Okay, well, this is going to tell us a lot. This pre-flop betting round alone is going to tell us that the tight player probably is on a range of something like just aces or kings. So pre-flop can be very significant for determining our opponent's range. And that's another thing, actually. It's going to be easier to range tight players than loose ones, because from the tight players, just the fact that they've elected to play that hand can be very significant. Whereas a very loose player, we're not going to learn as much about his range from the pre-flop betting round. Now, the next thing I want to mention is that for right now, the concept is going to be the most important. We do have a full section devoted to deductive thought, logic, coming up with our opponent's specific range. So for right now, really important thing is getting the concept. And if we need more practice, don't worry, we're going to get a lot of that moving forward. And the final topic I want to talk about before looking at some hands and giving today's big quiz question is something I don't talk at all about in the chapter, which is congruent ranges. And I want to give an example of that in the context of pre-flop. Okay, so let's say that you want to come up with an opponent's range and you think that he would do it with pocket pairs from 8s or higher. Well, it's not going to make sense if his range is pocket pairs 8s or better, but he's also going to make this play with any ace or any king, because then that's too tight from the pocket pairs and too loose in other hands. So when it comes to pre-flop ranges, for example, here would be an example of a congruent range. Okay, so ace queen plus, as well as pocket eights plus, and ace jack suited. Okay, so this is a tight range that makes sense in terms of the pocket pairs equating to the unpaired hands. Similarly, if we were to go down to pocket fives, maybe that would equate to fives, ace nine offsuit plus, king queen offsuit, as well as the better suited Broadway hands, and ace eight suited. So this is something that we'll see in examples, but you want to make sure that your ranges make sense. So now we have several hands that we're going to look at as examples to give an idea of ranges, and they won't always be from hero's perspective. Okay, so in this first hand, hero folds, we have a raise, the small blind calls, and the big blind shoves. So one question we can ask here is, what is the big blind's range? Now, we can give either a very specific range, or we can just ask, is this basically a wide range? Does it contain a lot of hands? Is this going to be a very tight range? So this isn't our quiz question, but think about the answer to that. And my answer would be that he's probably going to be on a pretty wide range. The average stack appears to be about 5,000 chips early in this tournament. He's already lost most of them. He could easily be frustrated. So he might be on a range of most non-junky hands. So for example, any ace, any pocket pair, any Broadway weight, any kind of suited connector, as well as mid-high offsuit kings, whereas he's probably not going to have total junk. And this is an approximation, okay? So there are some tighter players who are going to need a strong hand to shove here. There's some players who are going to be in a range of any two cards, but we're just doing the best we can. So again, here, pretty wide range, but not quite anything. So let's see if we get to a showdown here. And maybe we can learn something from his range based on that showdown. And sure enough, so he has ace six offsuit. So any ace appears to be correct. And that might be how we range him in the spot. Now let's move one hand forward. And this same player is at it once again. So here the fact that one hand later he's shoving probably means that he's going to be a little bit tilted, he's going to be in a fairly wide range. But let's actually look at this from the perspective of PB&J lovers. So he's limped from UTG +1, and he now calls off 20 blinds. So here his range is probably going to be tighter. And the reason why is because he's playing this pot from UTG +1, and so he's definitely unlikely to have junky hands. So this is often going to be some kind of low pocket pair, a low suited ace. This could be suited connectors, but the lower suited connectors he's probably going to fold facing shove. So he's going to be on a tighter range compared to this player in the last spot, particularly considering that he calls it off. So that's our guess. Let's see the showdown here. And this is a hand outside, a little bit outside of what I would put his range on. And so you don't have to worry about that too much. Some of the time players will surprise you a bit. So here, if I was actually writing out his range, I would not have put a hand this weak in it. Okay, I probably would have put it down to say king 9 suited. And here he is king 5 suited. And don't worry about that. The important thing is that you understand the process, that you do it. And some of the time you're going to be off a bit. Slightly later, we pick up ace-king offsuit. Hero raises. And let's look at this hand from Albinu's perspective and think about what his range is going to be. So he calls from UTG +1 initially, so he's going to have a lot of low-mid pocket pairs, suited aces, suited connectors, suited Broadway hands. And hero bets. He calls. There are two players left to act, so he's definitely showing some strength. So this is the betting round where we can start really narrowing his range. And here it looks like he has an ace, certainly possible. Plenty of ace hands. He's going to play pre-flop. He's not going to fold them at the flop. He can have plenty of flush draws. So that's basically the only obvious draw. But he could definitely have a hand like King Jack of clubs, Queen 10 of clubs. So plenty of flush draws. And then also some hands containing an 8, like 8-7 suited. So this is his range when he calls the flop. As a quick side note, if I were here, I would be betting this turn card. But from a Bainu's perspective, we continue on, and he now checks. So he could certainly have an ace or an 8. That's still consistent with the way he's playing, but a flush becomes less likely because most players who turn the flush will bet because they want to start getting value from their hand. And this river is not a great card for us. We now only beat his ace hands. Hero checks again. He bets. And so what is his range now? So his range still consists of those 3 categories, but one of them has become more likely. Okay, so first of all, again, if he has 2 clubs, that's going to be less likely because he checked the turn and also because he can't have the ace or king of clubs. So there are fewer clubs that he could have in terms of him hitting a flush at the turn. Also with an 8, he could certainly have this hand that's pretty consistent, but there aren't too many hands containing an 8 he calls with preflop. And if he had an ace, this is pretty consistent. There are plenty of hands containing an ace he called with preflop that he would call the flop with, that he checks back the turn because he doesn't want to play a big pot, and then he now thinks are the best hand based on the fact that we have checked twice to him. So he might be putting us on a range. He might think, hey, it looks like this guy just has some kind of weak hand, and I think my ace is the best hand. So that's a pretty reasonable assumption there as to what he might be working with. We call, so we'll get to see a showdown. And sure enough, he does have ace-10. This bet he makes at the river was a value bet, which we'll be talking about shortly. And so that's how we might put this player on a range. And now we're going to look at one more hand, which will bring us to today's quiz question. So we're going to look at this hand. And you see this player here in the hijack? We're going to look at this from his perspective, okay? So the question that I'm going to ask you after we look at the betting is going to be for you to put this player on a range of hands. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and let's do it. So to begin with, here starts things off by folding under the gun. UTG +1 puts in the min raise. Eloy, the guy that we're going to be looking at the hand from his perspective, puts in a re-raise. He faces a shove. And he calls. Okay? So this completes the action. There's no more possible betting in this hand. We can't learn anything else. And so the question here is, what is Eloy's range? So again, what he's done is he's re-raised this UTG +1 initial raise. He's made it 600. He faces another player jamming on him, and he calls it off. So pause the video, come up with a range, and then I'll talk about what ranges pass or fail the test. Okay, so the thing is here is we cannot put them on an exact range. It's not like I'm going to say you pass this test if you put them on one exact range. So the range that I might put them on here is going to be something like, so let's do Cullen's answer. So I'm going to put him on a tight range. I don't think the average player is going to be doing this with too many hands. And so I'm going to say that he's on a range of something like Jack-Jack plus Ace-King, and that's pretty much it. But I'm going to accept wider. So the widest range that we're going to accept as being correct will be 8s or better, Ace-Queen offsuit or better, and Ace-Jack suited. So if you said any range that is up to this wide, then that's going to work. And the tightest range that we'll accept is if you said, hey, you know what? He is going to need a premium hand. And so he's not even going to have Ace-King in his range, okay? If he had Ace-King, he wouldn't have re-raised, he wouldn't have called it off. I don't think that's likely to be the case, but it might be, you never know. So you can put him on a range as tight as only aces or kings. Okay, so if your range was somewhere between this widest range and this tightest range, then you pass. If you put them on a range that's either significantly wider than this, or a range, I mean, the only range tighter than this would be just aces, then look a little bit more at ranges, study this a little bit more. But this is going to be the answer to today's quiz question. And so that's going to end ranges for today. So thanks a lot for watching. Hope you guys have enjoyed. And this has been Colin Moshman for the CardsChat.com course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days.